Thursday, March 21st, 1963, live from New York, Calendar, with Harry Reasoner and Mary Fickett.
Good morning.
Good morning.
They say, Lady Hunstanton, that when good Americans die, they go to Paris.
Indeed. And when bad Americans die, where do they go?
They go to America.
Oh, you've just seen the Calendar's theater players in a stunning performance of an excerpt from Oscar Wilde's Woman of No Importance.
Americans, good or bad, have made a special point of going to Paris since Thomas Jefferson went there as an ambassador and reported that he didn't like much what he saw. Many Americans, including thousands of GIs during the last war, agreed with Mr. Jefferson. But Paris remains the foreign city that most Americans, good or bad, want to see before they die.
A lot of what Americans feel about Paris came from the young artists and writers and high livers from this country who lived there after the First World War. Paris, France, is a part of the American 1920s. This morning on Calendar, we're going to see some of the Paris that is part of the 1960s. The only independent American university in Europe. It's in Paris. And we'll see if American youth today kicks up the way American youth yesterday used to do.
The question is, Paris is a nice place to visit, but can a young American actually study there? I'll be back with a view of the Paris that captured America after the following message.
Looking for direction? The 4-H way points to a destination of leadership, a knowledge of town and country business, community service, new skills, and an interesting, satisfactory career. 4-H clubs help boys and girls to work, to learn, to achieve. Head, heart, hand, and health. Pledge to greater loyalty, larger service, clearer thinking, and better living. 4-H clubs. Good for boys and girls. Good for America, too.
The snow that year wasn't real snow. You just paid some money and it went away. That line of Scott Fitzgerald's described the feeling of the young Americans, rich and poor, who went to Paris in the 1920s, disenchanted by the World War and what came after. Some of them wrote, some of them composed, some painted, and all of them pretended to write, compose, paint, or take a somehow keener interest in life than this country offered them. It wasn't only Americans, of course. Young people from all over the world found Paris a symbol of freedom that the home country didn't offer. In his book, That Summer in Paris, author Morley Callahan says, Paris was around us, and how could it be alien to our minds and hearts? What it offered to us was what it had offered to men for hundreds of years. It was a lighted place where the information was free. You came to Paris to study, the argument goes. You were never too old, and the classroom was the sidewalk cafe. The gendarme gave directions to and fought with Hemingway and Fitzgerald and James Joyce and Picasso and Gershwin and 1,000 tourists. Posters announced meetings political and literary, and the flowers were abundant and cheap, even for the struggling artist. And absolutely free, you could wander the bookstalls of the Seine. The Paris generation of the 20s, finding the world of war and reality bad, searched the world of art. And art meant calling chestnuts marron. A thing called Dada introduced to art the reading aloud of newspaper articles while bells rang, and artists exulted when hundreds were turned away from the gallery. No matter what you saw or read or did, the cafe remained the classroom. If you couldn't accomplish much in Paris in the 20s, or even if you could, there were the girls. The Paris of the 20s was neither as frenzied nor as frivolous as it seemed to be. Amid all the music and drinking and dancing and the wrecked lives and ruined artistic reputations, a lot of good work was done, amid all that music and dancing in the streets. The Paris recalled in books, from The Sun Also Rises, published in 1926, to the memoirs that are still being written, changed with the Depression and the war and the Cold War. But there are still young Americans studying in Paris, and 100 of them attend the first independent American college in Europe. Does American youth still flame in Paris? We'll see after the following message.
Meet the James Byrne family of Pasadena, California. All 8 of them. Just think of all the colds and the spills. Thank goodness for this new high-count economy box of Kleenex tissues. Gives you more tissues than any other box at any price. So when other boxes run out, you still have this many tissues left in the high-count economy box. It's the same size as ordinary boxes, but holds 50% more tissues, like getting a box and a half of tissues in every box. You get more for your money and always have plenty of tissues on hand for every family need. Touching up makeup, or, drinking up spills again. This new Kleenex high-count economy box is just one of 3 new space-saving boxes from Kleenex. There's also a regular count box and a dispenser size box. Who else but Kleenex gives you so many tissues in such slim and handy boxes?
If you have a high school child reading Hemingway or Fitzgerald, you may have a high school child anxious to study in Paris. The American in Paris 40 years ago had so good a time, as we saw, that he changed the American outlook. For a report on what it's like today, here's CBS News correspondent Frank Kearns.
For the first time in history, there's now an independent American college in Europe. And it's not being chauvinistic to say that this whole thing is a tribute to typically American community spirit, to private enterprise, and to private initiative. These older guests are leaders of the American foreign community, the backers of this new American college, top businessmen abroad, military officers stationed in Europe, professional men, plus a broad range of U.S. diplomats. Such Americans living abroad have long been faced with the problem of schools for their children. Sending sons and daughters back to the States is expensive, and in later years, it means breaking up the family for long periods. So there's always been a hunger for an American college in Europe. The man who started it all is a former State Department official, Lloyd Delameter, addressing this orientation class. He's only 40, an economist with a PhD from the Sorbonne, has studied everywhere from Columbia in New York to Munich, Heidelberg, and Paris. Many of the classes are held in the church building, but there's a special little campus at the American Student and Arts Center where there's room and atmosphere for relaxation as well as study. Incidentally, this first student body consists of 100 hand-picked students out of 500 applicants who've come here from American families living all over Europe and other areas stretching from Iceland to Southeast Asia. 90% are American. The others add a vital international flavor. Aside from the joys of being in Paris, this first class of the American college has it good financially. Tuition is a fraction of that for most colleges in the States. Students can go to concerts for about 10 cents, ride the subway at reduced fares, and above all, their meals and rooms are relatively inexpensive. Lunch or dinner in a French student restaurant is only about 45 cents, well under stateside menu prices. And those living away from home abroad can stay in a dormitory for $60 to $80 a month, meals included. Or with selected French families, breakfast and one other meal included for about $90 a month. The classes here are stimulating and tough. Here, for example, a little eavesdropping on a typical class, Introduction to Sociology. The professor, George Theriault, normally holds the chair of sociology at Dartmouth. His own year's sabbatical in Europe says he jumped at the chance to work with such exciting students. Out of the classroom, this first student body of the first American college in Europe is enjoying what can only be described as the most beautiful campus in the world, Gay Paris. To dig into the way these students think, what they think, we staged a little impromptu bull session. But what do the French students think of American girls?
Well, that's kind of a touchy question. I know some, it kind of depends on their experience with American girls. Those who've just seen them, I don't think they really think that much of them because in general, the American girls don't seem to be as well dressed and don't appear as well as the French girls do. but after they get to know them, I think that they like them a lot more.
Well, I have heard a major complaint from French boys in regard to American girls, and it kind of came as a shock to me, was that we're supposedly aggressive. We're not as really, I've heard this many times, that they expect this American girl to come in and have all kinds of violent arguments and things like that. This is just an opinion from a small cross-section, but it does exist.
I don't see how any, well, I suppose it's how you've been brought up, but I certainly wouldn't classify French girls as on the whole better dressed than American girls. I certainly can't see that. Specifically, the ratted hair. I don't know when I've seen a thing that I like less than those terrible beehives.
No, that's a question of personal taste.
Yes,
It happens to be in style this year, you know.
Well, if it doesn't show the ratting, but when it gets so that it's about 3 feet high and wavering around the subway and that sort of thing.
Not the things in the metro.
Yes, and you see them balancing.
You can't hold it up.
I don't think it's a question of dress, actually. It's just it's a question of personality. Because I think foreign girls are generally considered to be more worldly, more sophisticated than Americans.
I talked to a French student just yesterday who said that I asked the same question. He said he found the French girls more sophisticated in dress and in manner and approach, but found the American girls more natural and more casual and more informal. Do you agree with this?
I think this tradition plays an important part. I know that in America, most girls are consider themselves more or less on the same plane as the men. But here in France, women are considered inferior, and maybe it's for this reason that the women have a little bit more savoir-faire, because they're from their inferior position. They still got to manage to get around men somehow, and they do it by, well, little tricks that they manage to learn. This is why most French men complain that American girls are too forward and too strong, and they think things that women shouldn't think. They shouldn't.
Yeah,
women should be submissive.
The French like to say that there's only been one feminist in French history. You know, that after Madame de Stael, that the thing just died out, and she died about 1820 or 30, something like this.
The French woman still manages to control quite a bit.
Yeah, there's a certain coercion.
Well, you know, I think that the Frenchmen kind of like to have their cake and eat it too, because they like to say, we set our women on a pedestal, and yet we know that they do occupy a lesser position than those in America.
We'll be back with more of Young Americans in Paris after the following message.
Tired of that hospital odor left in your wash by chlorine bleaches? Now there's a sunny, fresh air bleach that sweetens your wash. Powdered Snowy, the bleach that leaves your clothes smelling just like fresh air. Mother always hung her wash outdoors in the sun to get rid of soap and chlorine odors. That's why her wash smelled so sweet and fresh. But with today's automatic washers and dryers, or hanging indoors, there's no place for these chlorine odors to go, so they cling to your clothes. But Powdered Snowy bleach is chlorine-free. Snowy is an oxygen bleach. Works just like the sun and fresh air to bleach clothes white, keep them smelling sweet. Yes, Snowy bleach puts that sweet, fresh air smell into everything you wash, every time you wash. So end the hospital odor left by chlorine bleaches. Keep your clothes smelling sweet and fresh with Snowy, the fresh air bleach.
We're continuing our look at the students at the first independent American college in Europe. The locale is Paris, the guide CBS News correspondent Frank Kearns.
Where do you eat, for example? Do you go to a restaurant? Do you eat at home with the family, or what?
Well, that's been a big problem with me, because I live in a room by myself, and I have to cook all my own meals. And I've never done this before, so for the first month or so I had a lot of trouble. I ate hamburgers for a month. But now I'm getting to be pretty good cook, and I'm managing all right.
Most of us eat at student restaurants, such as the one on Rue Marseille, which it isn't exactly a restaurant. It's more a cafeteria atmosphere, actually. And the food is good, except for certain delicacies which are distinctly French and quite foreign to Americans, such as tripe and brains and fried eels, which you certainly have to do a little adjusting to get used to.
I think one of the big problems of French understanding, one of the things I've noticed anyway, is that the French just don't appreciate the existence of a society like American society where we benefit from a national consensus. The Frenchman is if he is a left-winger, he's irrevocably divided from the right-winger, and if he's well, there's all sorts of shades of political opinion, and voting in elections makes a major difference, whereas in the United States, because of this national consensus, we agree on a great many things, and whether the Democrats or Republicans get in, life is going to be essentially the same. French, for instance, right now, don't understand how it is that we can elect Republican governors and Democratic senators, or vice versa.
Yes, but you make it sound as though they're all dogmatic and irrevocably set one way or another, and I don't think they are. I think a great many of them are vacillating, particularly at the present time. I met a boy up at the restaurant the other night who was a communist of a sort. That is, he said, we got the conversation going over the mustard pot, as is usual, and he said, you're an American, aren't you? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I'm a communist. And I said, oh, are you? And he said, well, no. And he seemed to feel as though I ought to explain to him why he ought not be a communist, and as though communists ought to explain to him why he ought to be a communist. And he was just sitting back and letting everybody throw things at him, and then he was going to make his own choice. But he certainly wasn't set about anything. He certainly had a great deal of broad-mindedness about the issue.
Speaking of that, how do you feel about Cuba, all of you? Do you have strong feelings either way on it?
Yes, I really do have strong feelings on Cuba. I think that there were two things that Kennedy could have done. One of them was to have ignored the whole thing and let them put those bases in there, and the other was to do what he did. And I think if he'd gone ahead and let them put the bases in, that we would never have been secure again, that it would have been a constant sort of Damocles sort of thing. I'm very much in favor of what he did, although I see that it may have a few unpleasant repercussions.
Do most of your friends feel this way? Do all of you feel this way?
I certainly feel that he was right in going ahead, and I think he knew what kind of a chance he was taking. And my mother, who was in the United States at this time, said that the country itself, we couldn't imagine how, well, they weren't exactly hysteric, but people were buying bottled water and canned things, and they were really rather worried. But I would support to the hilt his action, because I think really for the first time we were on the offensive, and it was the Russians who were reneging and drawing back. And I think that this is a major step forward. It was high time that this happened.
Yeah, that's what I'd say, high time. My only question is it a case, again, of too little and too late? I personally wonder if maybe Senator Russell didn't have the right idea that an immediate invasion was the answer. I don't know. We'll know perhaps by the end of next year.
In your out-of-class time here, do you spend much time talking politics, or are you too busy studying and having fun?
There's always a lot of room for discussion on the French political scene. They're always having some kind of a crisis. Recently there was a referendum, and so there was all kinds of discussion on that. People in the streets were yelling yes and no, and where I was, people were really, really avid. And I think that's kind of the situation all the time in France. No matter what it is, everyone's avid.
Do you have arguments among yourselves about Americans and Frenchmen as such?
From time to time, especially in the small kind of student hangouts that I go to occasionally. There's a lot of discussion. The Americans and the French really discuss politics quite a lot. Most recently it's been on the Cuban situation, of course, and the French outlook was very interesting. They, at the start, condemned everything that the United States was doing, but when they saw that things were going to be okay, then they shifted, and now everything's fine.
These, then, are the new Americans abroad, a part of the new America with international commitments and international responsibilities. And if these young men and women here at this new American college in Europe are typical of the future American abroad, we have nothing to worry about. The future is in good hands. This is Frank Kearns reporting from Paris.
A look at Americans in Paris. We'll be back with a mid-morning edition of CBS News after the following message.
Now there's a tooth powder that contains stannous fluoride. New Dr. Lyon's tooth powder with fluoride is the first and only fluoride tooth powder. Dr. Lyon's tooth powder with fluoride gives you the superior cleaning action of tooth powder plus fluoride, the ingredient approved by dentists to help prevent cavities. For the best daily dental care, get new Dr. Lyon's tooth powder with fluoride, the first and only tooth powder that contains stannous fluoride.
If you're in the dark about laxatives, here's some light on the subject. Haley's MO is the triple action laxative with ingredients doctors recommend. Triple action means Haley's MO is a laxative, an antacid, and a lubricant all in one. So Haley's MO brings more complete relief than ordinary laxatives. Triple action means Haley's MO is the laxative for you. Get the triple action laxative with ingredients doctors recommend. Get regular or flavored Haley's MO.
All's well with Cosmos 13. That's the latest from Moscow on Russia's newest satellite. It went up this morning with no one on board. The Cosmos series of satellites has the job of collecting data for future Soviet manned flights. President Kennedy gives the nation his impressions of the Central American Summit Conference in a televised news conference today. The report will be carried by CBS, as it happens, at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before leaving Costa Rica yesterday, Mr. Kennedy spoke to a gathering of university students.
It is no accident that this year in Cuba, agricultural production will be 25% below what it was 5 years ago. The great myth of the 1950s was that through a system of communism, it was possible to produce a better life for our people. Through a denial of political freedom, we could provide more material advances. But the 50s showed us well in China, the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, East Berlin, and Cuba, that when you deny political and social freedom, you also deny the right to advance economically. Viva Costa Rica, arriba Costa Rica, muchas gracias.
As for the conference declaration, Marvin Kalb gives us this report.
The document focused on two problems, economics and the problem of Castro. On economics, the 7 presidents of Central America, the United States, and Panama agreed to accelerate the step-by-step economic integration of the Central American Common Market, with heavy financial assistance from the United States. The second problem on this entire issue of Castroism, the 7 presidents agreed to a high-level meeting in early April to take on this problem, to try to stop Castro-type subversion in this part of the world, to stop, if possible, the flow of tourists, agents, and money in and out of Cuba. 2 other factors equally important. The extraordinary popularity of the president here with the people of Costa Rica. He did really as well as he did in any Democratic Party precinct in Massachusetts. And the second point, this meeting proved that the Kennedy administration, despite congressional criticism and pressure here in Central America, has decided definitely not to be pressured into any kind of precipitous action against Cuba. This is Marvin Kalb in San Jose, Costa Rica.
The trouble on the Southeast Asian island of Bali today assumes the proportions of a major disaster. The trouble, of course, is at least one and perhaps more violent eruptions of the island's Agung volcano. First reports listed 150 dead, but today authorities in Indonesia say the volcano has killed at least 400. Patrol boats are rushing from nearby Indonesian islands to evacuate 250,000 from the stricken parts of Bali. Nothing new this morning on contaminated tuna. Health officials in Detroit, where 2 women died, say it may be several days before they can trace the source of the unusual form of food poisoning. So far, suspicion centers on a particular brand of tuna sold under the A&P label, all of which has been withdrawn from the A&P stores. Just for the record, spring arrived at 3:20 this morning. Looking back, U.S. weathermen say the winter just passed was among the most severe for the past 100 years. They're telling us. That's the news. Mary and I will be back after this message.
Hear ye, hear ye! Big news from Campbell's! New Bounty brand beef stew.
Now, Campbell quality comes to beef stew. New Bounty brand beef stew from the Campbell Soup Company.
Hear ye, hear ye. Bounty means goodness and lots of it.
Yes, Bounty means goodness and lots of it. Lots of tender, lean chunks of beef, plus nourishing vegetables, carrots, potatoes, tomatoes, onions, and garden sweet peas. There's a bounty of beef and vegetables in every serving. Here's a beef stew your family will love. A stew preferred almost 3-to-1 in actual taste tests.
Hear ye! New Bounty brand beef stew!
Bounty means goodness and lots of it. Also try Bounty brand chicken stew, 2 new products from the Campbell Soup Company.
Harry, est-ce que vous savez aujourd'hui est le premier jour de printemps?
Oui.
I kind of thought you'd say that.
What did you say?
I said I just wanted to be sure that you knew that today was the first day of spring.
Sure, I did. Have you ever been to Paris?
Yes, I was there in
Is
1949.
it as wild and gay as those students make it seem to be?
Well, as they say, où sont les neiges d'automne?
Where are the snows of yesterday?
Yes. I don't...
Well, they were still outside on the streets when I came in this morning.
I think that Paris was wonderful. I kind of wish that I had had a chance to be a student there. I think it would be fun to go to college in another country, in a foreign-speaking country.
I think it's a good thing. I think it's quite clear, if Frank Kern's got a representative group, and I imagine he did, that the whole idea, or the whole kind of expatriate American has changed. These kids aren't rebels against their country. They're merely well-rounded. It's part of the general trend toward looking for security and conformity rather than whatever the people who were over there in the 20s were looking for.
And also, weren't the people who went over there in the 20s older than these people?
They were older and they'd been through a war, most of them, and I don't think these kids have been through a war. They're just having trouble with hairstyles.
That happens in almost any country, you know.
This is one of those cases, I suppose, where it's easy to fall into a good old days complex. And the good old days complex about Paris in the 20s, which is so widespread, is one of the strangest of the good old days complexes, because who was there? I've never been to the place. It may not have been that way at all. We'll be back tomorrow. Goodbye.
Imagine, people have been saving money at the Rexall store since 1903. And now, Rexall celebrates its 60th anniversary with a fabulous sale. Hundreds of bargains. Look, hairspray, Bright Set. The giant size is what you get for only 98 cents. So get 2 or 3 or 4. And facial tissue. 5, 6, 7, 8 cartons of 200 for only $1. What a sale! Here's something extra nice. Caranome toiletries at just half price. Hand cream, lotion, deodorant, and the same for Fast Home Permanent. And Saccharin with a 1,000-tablet bottle at the regular price, you get a bottle of 500. Free. So be sure to shop this sale with bargains galore on now. But only at your Rexall store.
Tomorrow on Calendar, a man who insists that telephones are for people. Calendar, with Harry Reasoner and Mary Fickett, was presented live from New York. The nurses face a charge of homicide.